Institutional crisis in Honduras. In view of the appointment of two parallel authorities, the elected president, Xiomara Castro, met with her followers in the National Congress and reiterated that the act of appointing Jorge Calix lacks legitimacy. The president of Armenia, Armenian, announced his resignation on Sunday, arguing that he lacks the power to influence national policy. The Yemeni armed forces announced that more than 120 members of the Saudi-led coalition forces were killed and injured in the Shabwa governorate, while more than 12 armored vehicles were destroyed. Hi, this is From the South. I'm your news anchor, Diego Martin, from the teleSUR studios in Havana. We begin with the news. There is an institutional crisis in Honduras. In view of the appointment of two parallel authorities, the elected president, Xiomara Castro, met with her followers in the National Congress and reiterated that the act of appointing Jorge Calix lacked legitimacy. The next president decided to go to the Congress headquarters to meet with her political allies after the appointment of a parallel authority in which Jorge Calix was appointed as president of the Congress in a session held in a different venue. The legitimate authority will be decided by the rest of the nation's institutions, despite the fact that the coalition led by the Free Party, headed by Xiomara Castro, was the winner in the recent elections.
No legitimacy what they did to elect the board that was appointed 2 days ago. It has no legitimacy because they did not allow the vote. They were sworn in illegally, and logically everything that has emerged from there is incorrect.
The elected president, Xiomara Castro, in Honduras recalled that the Honduran people voted against the dictatorship, and handing over the legislative power is handing it over to the dictatorship.
When the people unanimously, with a majority surpassed 51%, it is precisely to get rid of this dictatorship, and not only this dictatorship, it is to get rid of the practices that have been carried out in the dictatorship. So we cannot continue to allow it. The people pronounced themselves and have to respect the decision of the citizens. And if we as Honduran people continue to accept these practices, then practically what would be happening is the legislative power is once again the dictatorship in control of state power.
And in declarations to the press, the deputy of the Parliament of Honduras, Luis Redondo, declared that he did not recognize any imposition contrary to the will of the Honduran people.
We do not recognize any other board of directors, nothing that they try to impose in a spurious manner, violating the will of the people that was given at the polls. None of this is recognized neither by us nor by the people, and this is something that all media and the people throughout the country can confirm.
Luis Redondo denounced that the power outage registered this Sunday was produced intentionally, while highlighting the work done by the media and the appointment of the new board of directors of the National Congress.
In fact, today they left us without power, and that was malicious. They knew we were coming at 7 in the morning. The Constitution empowers us and the organic law to celebrate this occasion, and they left us without power today. Our light, the light that illuminated us, was the light of journalists, the light of a symbolic journalism that represents for us a way to inform people. Here it is not my words, it is not what I say. There is behind, look at us. It is the people who are here and everywhere what makes this process legitimate.
Member of the National Congress, Luis Redondo, denounced the links that sustained members of the parallel Congress with criminal structures, which he described as a deception to the Honduran people.
We here are placed and sustained by the will of the people, and that is the difference. Not sustained by criminal structures, not by helicopters that allow people who have deceived, people who have betrayed people to move around. We represent here what you yourself have just seen, the will of the people.
The Honduras president-elect said on Twitter, "I recognize the presidency of the Congress headed by Deputy Luis Redondo. I invite you to my swearing in with the people on January 27th and congratulate the deputies who reject 12 years of Juan Orlando Hernandez's corruption networks. On my way to greet them at the Congress. We won," exclaimed the new head of state. Human rights defender Miriam Miranda took to Twitter and said, "This is a joke. Either we live in the country of the absurd." The drug dictatorship, which plunged the country into the worst crisis in its history for 12 years, which dealt a technical blow to the Supreme Court of Justice on December 12, 2012, now proclaims itself the guarantor of democracy and governance. And in Honduras, a wake was held in the National Congress to prevent dissident lawmakers of the Libre Party from imposing a board of directors which breaks the agreements between that political force and the Salvador Party of Honduras.
Hundreds of people arrived at the National Congress in Tegucigalpa, summoned by the president-elect, Xiomara Castro de Celaya.
We worked for them to be lawmakers, and they sold out to the highest bidder. So we will be on the streets starting today, so out with the traitors.
We are here because of the call to the video. We will always be supporters of their positions, and we hope that everything goes in the best way. I trust my colleagues that they will reflect and make a decision for the good of our country.
Although the first vote of the National Congress favored lawmaker Jorge Calix with a majority, the people maintains the hope that in the final election everything will be reversed.
We are thinking that it will be rectified and that we are going to achieve the majority and that tomorrow lawmakers Luis Redondo will be ratified so that justice can be done and the current problem that exists in this country can be solved.
For her part, President-elect Xiomara Castro assured that she will fight to reestablish democracy in Honduras, and the fight will begin by rescuing the National Congress.
We would not allow them to look for mechanisms to return to those deplorable spaces that we have had to live in. Honduras changed as of November 28, 2021. Today, we are different because they will never again raise their weapons against the Honduran people.
The candidate for President of the National Congress, who is backed by the agreement between the Libre Party and the Salvador Party of Honduras, assured that the interests behind the betrayal of some lawmakers could be defeated.
Criminal structures linked to drug trafficking, money laundering, we trust that plunder this country. What they don't want is someone or a group of people who want to bring order to the country.
President Xiomara Castro, in her campaign, offered to repeal laws that are contrary to the will of the majority of the Honduran people, with emphasis on the fight against corruption. And for this, it is necessary to balance the forces of the National Congress.
The National Institute of Migration rescued 65 migrants who were crammed into a vehicle traveling along Highway 57 in Metahuala, Monterrey, Mexico. The organization reported another 28 migrants rescued in Jalapa in a joint operation with the Republic's General Prosecutor's Office. On the same day in Jalapa del Marqués, a locality of Oaxaca in northern Mexico, a false ambulance was identified with 28 migrants, 9 of them underage. The driver of the unit, who claimed to be a health worker, was placed under the order of security agencies. Last 2021, Mexico intercepted more than 252,000 migrants in its territory, and between January and November of the same year, deported more than 100,000. We'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Let's focus in Brazil, where our correspondent Brian Mayer brings us a story about the life of one of the most famous architects in the country, Oscar Niemeyer.
Jair Bolsonaro has made a name for himself through decades of fascist, anti-communist hate rhetoric and threats against anyone who he decides to call a communist. But in the last 3 years since he became president of Brazil, he's been living and working in buildings designed by one of the nation's most famous communists, architect Oscar Niemeyer.
He officially joined the Brazilian Communist Party in 1945, and from that moment forward, Niemeyer never abandoned communism until the day he died. He was a friend of Fidel Castro and many other important socialist leaders. Fidel Castro even once said that he and Niemeyer were the last communists on earth.
When Niemeyer was chosen to design all of the government buildings and residences in the new Brazilian capital city of Brasilia in 1956, he envisioned a city in a utopian future in which there would be no class differences and attempted to design buildings that would weaken the class system.
He was influenced by the Russian vanguard architects who exploited the relationship between public and private architecture, opened up internal space to the outside, with pillars, open floor plans, and glass facades, and it is this transparency that we see in the architecture of Brasilia.
Every morning, Brazil's anti-communist president wakes up in a bedroom designed by a communist, has breakfast in a communist-designed kitchen, and heads off to work all day in the communist-designed Planalto Palace. Has he ever stopped to think about this?
I don't remember ever reading about any opinion of Bolsonaro's on the works of Oscar Niemeyer in Brazil, but this doesn't surprise me because whenever an important Brazilian cultural figure dies, he never says a word about it, and he doesn't have the mental capacity to understand these works anyway.
Ryan Mir, teleSUR, Brasilia.
The president of Armenia, Armen Sarkisian, announced his resignation on Sunday, arguing that he lacks the power to influence national policy. In a statement published on the website of the head of state, Sarkisian claims that he does not have the necessary tools to influence the processes of domestic and foreign policy in what he considers a difficult time for the country and the people. The president pointed out that the country needs unity, and his figure diverts public attention from the most relevant issues. Armen Sarkisian, a member of the Republican Party of Armenia, has been the president of the country since April 9, 2018. The Russian government announced that the West is preparing new provocations around the conflict in Ukraine. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova denounced as part of a campaign of disinformation in the United Kingdom's accusations about an alleged Russian plan to promote a presidential candidate in Ukraine closer to their interests, referring to former parliamentarian Evgeny Murayev. Moscow urged London to stop provocations, which it said were a part of a strategy to manipulate public opinion on the conflict with Ukraine. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson plans to send Defense Minister Ben Wallace to Moscow for talks with his Russian counterpart. The British Premier, who sees the crisis in Ukraine as a litmus test for Western unity and determination, wanted to take advantage of the invitation previously extended by Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu to send Wallace to Moscow. In his invitation, Shoigu insisted on the importance of keeping the lines open. Tensions over the Ukrainian conflict have been growing in recent weeks over an alleged buildup of Russian troops near the Ukrainian border that the West has called invasion. Voters in Portugal casted their ballots a week ahead of the country's national elections. The official election date is January 30th, but authorities are allowing people who aren't in quarantine to vote a week early. The ballot came 2 years ahead of schedule after Parliament in November rejected the minority socialist government's 2022 state budget, and the country's president, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, called a snap election. The ballot elected 230 lawmakers to the Republican Assembly, Portugal's parliament. Lawmakers then voted on who forms a government. The centre-left Socialist Party has ruled Portugal since 2015 under Prime Minister Antonio Costa, and recent opinion polls unanimously indicate the socialists will collect most votes.
I have already fulfilled my civic duty of voting, and I would like to make a general appeal today to all those who have requested it to vote today, and the others to vote on the 30th. The vote is the most important date of each democracy. It's the unique moment citizens decide what they want to their future.
Cuba continues at the forefront in the fight against the pandemic. Mambisa, the first vaccine candidate in the world for nasal use to begin clinical studies in humans, is advancing in its application to convalescents and as a booster shot. The vaccine proved to be safe and provided immunogenicity in its phase 1 and 2 in 120 adult volunteers. During the first stage, nasal drug devices were compared, 2 of them in form of nasal spray and another one in the form of drops. Mambisa has demonstrated safety with only mild side effects reported. Additionally, in all age groups, the vaccine induced an antibody response more than 4 times the initial level. According to the president of Biocuba Pharma, Eduardo Martinez Diaz, Mambisa, unlike other vaccines created in the world, can achieve sterilizing immunity.
I want to emphasize the case of the Mambisa vaccine. The vaccines that have been developed in the world, including ours, that were used in the vaccination campaign, although they have been very effective in avoiding hospitalization, serious symptoms and death, they do not really manage to cut the transmission, and hence they need to achieve vaccines that accomplish what is called sterilizing immunity, which is a vaccine that allows to cut the transmission. As long as the transmission continues and the virus is not cut off, new mutations will appear and there is a risk that it will escape the protection of the vaccines. So we will almost have to start from scratch, developing new vaccines. In this sense, Mambisa, which is administered nasally, is in clinical evaluations. The results are very positive, but we think this vaccine will play a very important role in sterilizing immunity, because as the entry route of the virus is the mucous membranes, what this vaccine does is to induce a mucous immunity.
The COVID-19 pandemic has entered a new phase with the Omicron variant, which could infect 60% of people in Europe by March and could bring it to an endgame scenario, the World Health Organization Europe Director Hans Kluge said on Sunday.
So it's plausible that the region is moving towards a kind of a pandemic endgame, not an endgame of the COVID-19, but a pandemic endgame. But of course, so that once that the Omicron wave will subside, there will be for quite some weeks and months a global immunity, either thanks to the vaccine or because people have immunity due to the infection, and also lowering seasonality. So we anticipate that there will be a period of quiet before the COVID-19 may come back towards end of the year, but not necessarily the pandemic coming back. And why it will come back? Because the
Belgian police fired water cannons and tear gas on Sunday in an attempt to disperse demonstrators in Brussels who gathered to protest against the government's COVID-19 measures and virus vaccinations. The demonstrators marched through the capital before gathering in Cinquantenaire Park in the city's European quarter, where they expressed their opposition to the government's virus policies. Riot police were out in force and eventually moved in to disperse the protesters after they ignored instructions broadcast over loudspeakers that the demonstration was finished and that they should leave. Police water cannon trucks fired powerful jets at the demonstrators, while thick clouds of smoke and snaking trails of tear gas filled the air. Sunday's march followed demonstrations in other European capitals on Saturday and Sunday that also drew thousands of people protesting vaccine mandates and other restrictions. We have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Yemeni armed forces announced that more than 120 members of the Saudi-led coalition forces were killed and wounded in the Shabwa governorate, while more than 12 armored vehicles were destroyed. An army spokesperson, Brigadier General Yahya Saree, revealed that the Saudi-led coalition suffered heavy losses in many of its equipment, adding that several coalition gatherings were successfully targeted by 4 ballistic missiles. It is noteworthy that Brigadier General Saree called Friday foreign companies in the United Arab Emirates to leave the country. A couple of days ago, a Yemeni military media broadcasted scenes from the Shabwa governorate, showing the escape of the UAE-backed vehicles and forces as a result of the Yemeni Army and Popular Committee strikes. And the leader of Guinea's military junta, Mamadi Doumbouya, appointed on Sunday the 81 members of the National Transitional Council that will legislate during the period that began on September 5 with the coup d'etat that overthrew President Alpha Condé. Danza Guruma will chair the newly formed council. He was a former leader of the National Council of Civil Society Organizations and has now been placed at the head of the transition, accompanied by Maimouna Yumbunu as first vice president and Elad Seni Fazinet as second vice president. Members of the platform will not be able to compete in the next elections, which will be local and then national. This will mark the end of the transition per se. The Economic Community of African States suspended Guinea from the bloc and sanctioned all members of the military junta after the coup against the government of Alpha Condé. And Senegal voters went to the polls on Sunday to elect mayors and local representatives in a vote seen as a key test of support for President Macky Sall. The election is the first in the West African country since deadly riots erupted last year following the arrest of opposition leader Ousmane Sonko. The poll, which comes 5 months ahead of an eagerly awaited general election, is also the first since Sall won a second term in 2019. Over 6 million Senegalese, around a third of the population, are eligible to cast votes for the mayors of more than 500 town halls, as well as the heads of 40 administrative areas known as departments.
It was very important for me to come and do my duty, because we are talking about the municipality. So it's up to us to choose someone who is ready to work for the municipality, someone who is ready to accompany us for the next 5 years.
The Syrian government has demanded that the United Nations and the international community take a stand and provide aid and protection to the thousands of families being killed in the province of Azake by U.S. forces and their allies. The Foreign Ministry has denounced that the actions perpetrated by Washington's troops and allies amount to crimes against humanity. The Syrian army forces have demonstrated that what they did in their war against terrorism is what has ensured the liberation of most of the Syrian territories from their crimes. Damascus has also called on the UN Security Council to fulfill its responsibilities in the maintenance of international peace and security. We've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at teleSUR English. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Dio Montin. Thanks for watching.